Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like everyone for a moment to imagine that you live in a remote and isolated community high up in the Andes of Peru. And you've just been chosen amongst your community members to travel across the continents to Canada for a week exchange. You're nervous because you've never left these mountains, but you're excited to see what's on the other side. But all decisions in your community must be made as a community as a whole. So you state your case. People ask, what are the motives? Why you? You're ostracized at the public assemblies and you're ridiculed across the local radios. But you stand your ground, quietly wondering if they're right. I waited with anticipation at the Toronto International Airport, waiting for these 6 brave leaders. I wasn't sure if they would even get on the plane. I wasn't sure if I would have. It seems like an easy decision to make to most of us. I travel a number of times a month. But for them, this was a different decision. This was a very hard decision. We had 12 spots and only 6 came. Only 1 was a woman. You see, there's a lot of confusion, anger, and mistrust right now in their communities. And above all, there's fear. Fear of change. Because big mining has just come to this region. And while they've set out to do it better, that's not the experience these people know. So we invited these 6 leaders, Teo, Carola, Nemesio, Alex, Ever, and Gregorio, to come to Canada and to share ideas and experiences with Canadian Aboriginal leaders about the impacts of mining, both good and bad, how they could benefit their communities, and how they could potentially work forward and navigate the obstacles. This is their story. They come from a place called Chumivilcas, which is in the heart of the ancient Inca Empire of Cusco, Peru. At 4,200 meters above sea level, it's the land of rocky mountains, impossible heights, extreme climate, and altitude so high it's hard to breathe. But it's also the land of beautiful, picturesque communities, literally in the clouds. They share a history of epic battles, courage, and bravery that's still very much alive in the hearts and souls of these people. They have a rich culture full of colors, full of dancing, laughter, singing, and music. And up until recently, they were a forgotten people, desperately and poor and marginalized since the Spanish landed on the shores of the Americas 500 years ago. Extreme poverty in Chumivilcas is at 65%, and malnutrition in infants is at more than 70%. Teo tells the story of his father walking 7 hours each way in search for food in a dry season. Gregorio walking at age 6 to school in 4 hours through the rough mountainous terrains in nothing more than sandals. Carola walking 8 hours to the nearest hospital just a day after giving birth. Illiteracy amongst women is extremely high, and youth leave in slews to cities to find major opportunities for jobs. And when you would mention the name Chumivilcas to government officials in the capital of Lima, you get blank stares. No one had even heard that they existed. So you had no public services, no roads, no hospitals, no schools. So communities such as Ever's existed on subsistence farming. Nemesio and Alex mined old caves left by the Incas. See, mining has always existed here, since the Incas mined it for gold for their jewelry and copper for their weapons. But the poverty here is not as a result of lack of funds, because Cusco is also the home of Machu Picchu, which is the world's #1 tourist destination, and it brings millions of dollars and millions of tourists every year to this region. The poverty is as a result of corruption, where government officials are literally stealing the money, and more than anything, it's racism. It's because of the color of their skin and the dirt under their fingernails. And what's happening in Chumivilcas is a microcosm of what's happening across Latin America and around the world today. Mining has been coined as the engine for growth in the coming decades, and governments, especially in the developing world, are scrambling to seize some of these billions of dollars of investments. Double the amount of concessions are being issued today than just 5 years ago, and this pushes mining companies into further and further remote territories where they're coming face to face with isolated communities. And because the government is just simply not present, the mining companies take on the responsibility as de facto government, providing basic services to communities. And communities have to all of a sudden learn very quickly how to manage massive influx of capital into their communities. and results in a slew of social problems: alcohol, drug addiction, and prostitution, because they all of a sudden have disposable income. But more than anything, there's conflict. There's a massive amount of conflict right now between companies, communities, and governments around the world. Bullets are flying, people are losing lives, farms are being bulldozed, livelihoods are being lost. There's an all-out war going on in the mining industry between mining and communities, and nobody is winning. Peru last year set the goal for its dialogue tables at 0 deaths, and still has not been able to achieve this goal. But the reality is communities are not necessarily against mining. They simply want to be part of the process. They want a seat at the table. So I thought, what if there was a way forward that involved collaboration? I wasn't sure, but I set out to find out. But first, I had to challenge my own judgments about the mining industry. How many people here in the room have an iPhone in their pockets? I do. I also have a BlackBerry, a laptop. I live in a condo. I rely on cars, trains, and buses for transportation. A cell phone has 11 mined minerals. A laptop has 66. A light bulb has 12, and our cities twinkle at night. And any day you drive around Toronto, especially in the summer, you see dozens of cranes building big condo buildings across our city, using copper piping, probably from Chumivilcas. People tell me all the time that mining is evil and it's against human rights. And I'm not here to tell you that mining is great. It's definitely not a renewable resource. But the reality is mining exists because of our own demands for natural resources. So unless we're prepared to change the way we live, the solution is not to end mining. The solution is simply to do it better. And the only way to do it better is to sit at the table and be part of the process. The reality is mining today is one of the most innovative and progressive industries there are. The mining company in Chumivilcas uses more than 85% recyclable water through its operations, and the water that comes out on the other side is perfectly clean. Mines around the world have significantly reduced their carbon emissions, and we're seeing more and more examples of mines being completely rehabilitated, bringing back entire ecosystems. And because of this mining company, Chumivilcas was on the map. Mayors and even ministers from the capital started to visit. Roads started to be built, schools, and hospitals. But I wondered to myself, did they really want this? Was this the development the communities were looking for? So I had to challenge another belief I had, this idealized notion I had that these indigenous and remote communities had found the perfect way to live in harmony with nature, and they didn't welcome modern development. So this is a picture of Teo's family farm. It's beautiful. But more than 60% of these cows are ridden with bacterial infections and diseases because of lack of sanitation and running water. And as a result, they are forced to use antibiotics and toxic chemicals that flow into the rivers, into the soil, and into the food that these families consume. And because they don't have electricity, this is the press that they use to make cheese that barely brings in enough income to keep the family alive. These are the realities that we don't talk about. One Aboriginal leader said to me that our idealized notion of Indigenous people living in harmony with nature and wanting to remain that way is akin to saying that all white people should continue to live in stone castles and drive horse-drawn carriages. How romantic those times were, but we all know it was a lot tougher than it seemed. And while there do remain today some communities that live in isolation and want to remain that way, that is the minority. Communities do want to develop. They simply want to be authors of what that looks like. Most leaders I know today have cell phones, laptops, and even Facebook accounts. But we can't forget the fact that they still maintain their connection to their environment. And this is something that can be very helpful if we're committed to doing mining better. They understand migratory patterns of wildlife, so they can tell us where to build a road or where not to. They understand soil erosion and can help save human lives. So if we're really committed to doing it better, and we're really committed to collaboration, they're the first ones we should invite to the table. So I thought, what if there was a way through collaboration where each side could enrich each other's lives and that of the global collective? I've had the unique experience of working on both sides of the table. I spent a number of years working in international human rights law across Latin America and around the world with governments and with communities. And I also spent a number of years working in corporate law with some of the biggest mining companies in the world. And so I've seen the conflict and the problems from both sides. And I knew there was a way forward that involved doing it better. There was one piece missing. Would this actually work? Could we implement it? And that's when I met Jerry. Jerry's a leading Canadian Aboriginal leader from the remote parts of British Columbia. And he took his community as chief from 98% unemployment, abject poverty, high suicide rates, no opportunities, to 0% unemployment, 0 suicides, thriving community, while all the while maintaining their priorities to environmental sustainability and stewardship. This was a sustainable model, I thought. Someone's done it. It is possible. I immediately saw the parallels with the communities I had worked with across Latin America and around the world. Not only do they share the same experience with marginalization and racism that prevails in our cities today, but they also shared an experience with mining. Because of the lack of opportunities that they couldn't find elsewhere, the lack of government presence, they looked to mining. And they found ways to work with mining in a way that was better, in a way that they could benefit and that the company could also benefit and do it more environmentally sustainable. Today, mining in Canada is the #1 employer of Aboriginal people outside of the government. And Aboriginal business in mining contributes annually more than $28 billion to the Canadian economy. But I wondered, would the communities in Latin America respond to this? Would they relate? So we set out and had meetings and traveled across Latin America and met with Indigenous and community leaders. And the results were astounding. They saw their own experience. They found somebody that they could trust and that could help them navigate the obstacles. When they would talk about the rampant poverty, Jerry would show pictures of the house where he grew up without running water or electricity. When they would talk about discriminatory government policies, he would tell them stories of his friends being shipped off to residential schools. So we started working with communities to build the tools for change. We didn't want to do it for them, but we wanted to empower them to do it for themselves. This went beyond teaching them how to fish. It was teaching them how to fish, market that fish, and create growth and opportunity for future generations. So what does empowerment really mean? This is the definition I first found. The World Bank says that empowerment is the process of increasing the capacity of individuals to make choices and to transform those choices into desired outcomes. But this, to me, was lacking. It missed the point. To me, empowerment was something more. It was authentic power. It was finding that core of who you are that allows you to be all you are meant to be. And then I found this feminist definition, that empowerment should lead to a situation where each one can become a whole being and use their fullest potential to construct a more humane society. Now, this rang true. This was something we could work with. So with this in mind, I'd like to share 5 simple but powerful tools for empowerment. Number 1 is knowledge. Many of my Aboriginal partners tell me that one of the biggest obstacles for them was the fact that people only thought that they were capable of carving totem poles and doing fancy beadwork. The reality is that many of these communities don't have PhDs in engineering or biochemistry, but they understand the environment, they understand their wildlife, and they understand the science of how things work. This is about respect. If you really truly want communities to make the appropriate changes and positive way forward for their communities, empower them with the best knowledge that's available. When we brought the 6 leaders to Canada, we introduced them to leading experts across Canada, leading experts in their fields, and they kept up with the best of them. And now the changes that they've been able to implement coming back are astounding. But knowledge goes both ways. It's also about listening and taking into consideration the knowledge that these communities have, because Indigenous knowledge and traditional knowledge is extremely powerful. Confidence. We all know that anything is possible once you believe in yourself. But 500 years of being told you're not worthy definitely takes its toll. So unless you are able to have the confidence in yourself and believe that you are capable of change, you won't be able to see the possibilities that are in front of you. So we encourage confidence building, leadership training, especially in women, and then the possibilities are endless. A vision for the long term. Many of these communities are subsistence communities who live day by day. But change doesn't happen overnight. It happens in 10, 20, 30 years. So a vision for the long term provides hope and motivation. This is the new milk plant that Evan negotiated for his community. And he came back from Canada with the vision that they were going to be the first organic milk producers in all of Peru. Now they have a way forward. They have something to work towards for the future. A platform where your voice can truly be heard. This means everybody coming to the table with an open mind and an open heart. How many of us sit at the table and we come with a predetermined notion of where we want that discussion to go? The reality is there are thousands of possible conclusions to any discussion. And when you don't come with an open mind, you're not empowering the people who are joining you at the table. Because you see, protesting and conflict is also a form of empowerment. But if you really truly want to empower people with a positive way forward, you'll come with an open, honest mind, an open and honest dialogue. Identity. It's not only about communities embracing their own identity, but it's about celebrating and sharing an identity. This is a book that was published with the mining company, the communities, and a famous photographer in Peru, documenting the history and culture of these people. And they brought this book to share with us when they came to Canada. And we spent a few hours going through it, page by page, as they recounted their stories to us. And the power I felt in that room at that moment was greater than what I felt in most other circumstances. But underlying everything is the need to create and hold space. A space that is conscious, authentic, and honest. A space that allows trust to be built. A space that allows healing to happen. And a space that can eventually bring both sides together to create a better way forward. And throughout my journeys, I came across an ancient Amazonian prophecy of the eagle in the north and the condor in the south. And the prophecy says that in the next 500 years, we're going to have the opportunity for the eagle and the condor to come together, to fly in the same sky, and to create a new consciousness for humanity based on peace and harmony. This is the potential, but it's up to all of us to help activate that potential and set a new course forward. Thank you.